Gospel.
So before we get into it, I wanted to find out a bit about you, your upbringing, your church life. Was you born into the church or did you start going later on in life?
Yes, I grew up in the church. I started praise and worship at a really early age. I must have been like 8. And I remember every Sunday my parents dragging me, and I did not want to go, but it was one of them ones. You had no choice whatsoever. You couldn't say no to going to church on Sundays. Yeah, and I pretty much stayed into the church up until I was about 18 when I left my parents' house. I stopped going to church every Sunday. I probably like once every few weeks, I'll pop in. And then I started doing gigs. So I would be singing at concerts. And that was probably the only thing that kept me close to the church. Even though I knew I should have been going to church, but it was kind of like there was so much anger and so much. I guess I had so many questions and they were just never answered. So it was just one of those, I just stayed away from the church completely. Yeah. People don't understand that being a pastor's child, you don't really have any friends. People aren't really your friend, they're your parents' friends. So I had so many expectations of how I should dress, how I should talk, what I should do. And it was kind of them ones where your parents can kind of push you to the older girls who were in the worship team to be like, oh, mentor my daughter. So like from my dressing, I started to dress a bit older than I am because most of the girls in the worship team were like 2, 3 years above my age. So I guess they were the kind of girls I lent on, but they weren't really my friends. We were completely different age groups, and we'd only see each other Saturday or Sunday.
Can you talk me through your experience?
Um, my experience was something that it was so sudden. It wasn't something like it was. I don't know. I always hear other people talk about, oh, it happened for years. Mine wasn't something that happened for years. It was just something that happened that one night, and I never really spoke about it for a very, very long time. Um, I remember telling my best friend about it, and she looked at me. She was like, "No, that is a lie." And I was like, "Why would I come to you and tell you something that is a lie?" And this happened while we were in church. It must have been 3 weeks after it happened. We were in church. He was preaching that Sunday, and I couldn't sit there anymore. I couldn't look at him and hear everything he was saying. It was almost like he was talking and it was just going over my head. And I could feel my hands shaking. I was panicking, but I didn't understand why. So I just stood up and I left the room. I went outside into the little kitchen area and she came after me. She was like, "Oh, what's wrong with you?" And that's when I told her. And for her, it was a joke for like a few seconds until she saw tears come out. My hands were shaking. That's when she was like, "Okay, we have to do something." And when I spoke about it, I spoke to two of my youth leaders. There were two women. And looking back at it now, I realized I failed myself because I didn't take into action that one of the lady that I told first, I didn't take into action that she had just recently come to the church. You know, she was closer to the youth, so they trusted her, but I knew she was known for gossip. So that was kind of my fault. But at the same time, you can't blame a child because they're going to someone who's an adult and who is in a position of power to be able to protect you. So when I told her, um, she was okay, we'll sort it out. We need to speak to the other youth leader. So we went and we spoke to her and they said, yeah, we'll sort it out. And I remember I told them it was at another youth conference. My life was based around church, pretty much. So most of these events that happened from the assault to it coming out happened in church. So there was never any privacy. So when it came out, when I told them in church. When I told my best friend, I told her in church. And it happened so quickly. It was dealt with so quickly that till this day, I don't even know what happened because I was never involved in the process. All I knew was we'll sort it out. They kept quiet about it. I went home, everything was okay. Next thing I knew, the youth leaders were coming to pick me up from my parents' house. And she was like, "Oh, we just want to talk to you about, that secret that you told us." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So she was like, "Oh, pack your bag, come stay at mine for a week." I was like, "Oh, okay." I went. My parents just thought, "Oh, maybe she just wants to have her for a week." It wasn't unusual. So I went to the house, and then she was like, "Okay, we've sent pastors over to tell your parents what had happened." And that's when the initial shock of it's actually happening now. I felt like for a moment I could breathe, but it didn't turn out that way because I had my phone taken from me. I couldn't talk to my parents. I didn't speak to anyone for a week. I was locked up in her house. And the next thing you knew, it was, okay, you can go home now. And that was it. I went home. I didn't really speak to my parents. It was just that awkward tension that was just in the house for weeks. We would go to church like everything was normal. Um, the thing about it, the whole situation was when it happened in my parents' house. And he lived in my parents' house. We were helping him out. So it was just like overnight when I went back home, his stuff was gone. There was no existence of him. And that was it. And for a while, I was just told you won't be able to sing in the worship team, which was understandable because a lot had happened. So I didn't think anything of it. But one pastor stood up and decided he was going to tell everybody what had happened. And the way the story came out was, and so slept together. So the story didn't come out as she was sexually assaulted. It came out as in they mutually agreed to sleep together. And I remember just the whole room just turned and looked at me. And I was sat with my friends at the back. And I remember, as kids, you'd all just be gossiping and just talking in the corner. I remember for the first time ever seeing my friends just silent. No one said anything. They just looked at me. And I remember just being in tears. I remember trying to like look forward to see where my parents was at, just trying to gauge a reaction. Your first instinct is to look at your parent, and that was it. And I remember my mom just mute. I just remember her crying. My dad didn't say anything. He just looked down. And that was the end of it. There was no further discussion ever since that day. Till this day, me and my parents have never ever spoke about what happened. And that built such a bridge between us for so many years. So I remember just going through the worst kind of depression. And I didn't know it was depression until I tried to commit suicide. I tried at least 3 times to commit suicide and it would fail. And then I remember one nurse just said to me, have you ever thought about starting to speak about what it is that's making you do this? And I was like, I know what it is that's making me do this, but I can't talk about it. And she was like, well, I can refer you to a nurse. It was actually a lady from Uganda who was a nurse. She referred me to a church where I started to speak to a pastor, and he was like, certain situations like this, it's not something that you just pray over. It's something that you need to get help. And that's when I started to seek therapy and get better, honestly. So after that, I guess that was a point where it clicked in my head that we can't keep quiet and we can't pray everything away. We have to do something. So this is why I spoke out.
Did you feel a bit helpless and cheated that it was just taken from you and then not maybe handled in the way that you would have expected or wanted?
I I didn't feel helpless up until we went to make a police report about it, and they were asking me so many questions like, did he groom you? And I would be like, no, because it wasn't like that. He was my brother. We were very close. There was no flirting of any such ever. So they were like, okay, do you have the clothes that you were wearing that night? Did you wash them? And I'll be like, yeah. It was just so many questions they would be asking me that the more they asked questions, the more I realized there's nothing that can happen to help you. And I remember at the end of it, the lady looking at me and saying, we can make a report, but at this point, there's really nothing much we can do because you don't have the evidence or all that. It was the point of, okay, I'm on my own now.
Yeah.
I'm really on my own now.
Was that a deterrent to you to like push to get it seen further because you just thought it's a lot of effort? And do you think that's why a lot of women don't generally, not even just in the church, but just generally don't speak about when things like this happen to them because they think about the process and they think it's just a very long one?
It is definitely. I have a lot of friends who came up to me and said, I've tried to report it, and it is something that I had no evidence of, so there's nothing I can do. So, yeah, I guess it kind of made me feel kind of angry, but at the same time, it was kind of a numbing feeling because it's like I'm fighting a lost cause. I'm really fighting a lost cause, so there was no point.
When it came to the church, then moving it back over to that, what would you have wanted them to do? Or what do you think should happen when these things do happen within the church with members of the church? What should happen?
I would say talking because we tend to do this thing of wrapping everything around Bible verses, wrapping everything around being spiritual. And sometimes you just need to sit down and talk to somebody and just be like, what happened? Or what can I do to help you? Just common, simple questions like that can do a lot for somebody. Because I never had somebody who sat down and said, okay, talk me through what happened. I never had somebody sit there and say, okay, how are you feeling now? I never had anybody check up on me. It was almost like all these friends that I had before this happened just vanished. Even when people in school found out, they just vanished. And I never had anybody to speak to me about it. So definitely just conversations. And if the church can't help because they don't know how to fix it, find people who can. It's really not the hardest thing to do. Find people who can. It was more of trying to protect the church than protect me because he was um he was like excused from the church. He left and that was it. So I was the one who was now left in the church. And I was the one who had now everybody just like talking about. So if this is something that is talked about more, it's not something that's uncommon to happen in churches. If you go to every church, you will always find a story and you will always find one or two people. So we need to talk about it because it might not be just one pastor, it might not just be one musician, it might be two or three other people, even people in the congregation who are doing it to children. So it needs to be talked about, definitely.
So did this put you off of going to church? Did it disrupt your relationship with God? Did it kind of make you question God and think, why has this happened with a brother in Christ? Why did it kind of mess up that kind of connection? And if so, how did you bring it back? And if it didn't, why do you think that was it didn't?
I feel like it didn't mess it up for me because I grew up as a pastor's kid, and you grew up knowing that if you can't lean on your own intelligence, you got to lean on God. And I remember even being a kid and having like an earache. And I remember crying in the middle of the night and like singing a gospel song because I remember mom telling me, if you do this and you really believe in the words that you are saying, you will find healing. So I guess that was something that kind of that stuck with me. I felt like, okay, cool. If the church doesn't want me, well, I'll take the church wherever I go. And if it means I have to stay in my house and I watch pastors on YouTube, I can do that. And that was something that kind of it kept me closer to God. And when I started to like see myself drift even further away, that's when I started to do like music concerts and be singing gospel. So yeah, somehow, some way, I've always found myself circling back to church, whether I know it or not.
Where do you stand on the identifying who's done it, in opposed to not doing that and just saying something's happened? We can't say who, but something.
Um, I feel like no matter what, you have to talk about it. I don't care whether you are a bishop, an usher, whatever you want to call yourself, the church lawyer, accountant. If you do something wrong to a minor, it needs to be talked about. It doesn't matter whether your ministry is not going to blow from there because you shouldn't even be around children like that. So the more we keep it quiet, the more we make little stories that fit the narrative of what he was trying to do, the worse damage we are doing to the church. Because now the church is just known for people stealing money, children being abused in silence, and people don't want to go to church anymore. It's kind of hard nowadays to invite someone to your church because they'll first ask you, what church do you go to? Because they want to know. They want to know everything about your church. And if there is something small about a pastor or whoever in that church, they'll just be like, nah, I don't want to go. So give people the option. Give people the option to know, yeah, there's a pastor who does this, who does that. It's your option whether you want to go or whether you don't. It should never have to be a secret.
Have you managed to kind of forgive, or are you still working through those feelings in terms of the perpetrator and the church in general? Because you said that you had a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness.
Oh, forgiveness. That is a hard one because I don't know. In my head, for years, I made excuses for him in order to calm down the voices in my head. So, growing up hearing people saying like, "Oh, she wanted it," or she went after him and stuff like that, it hurt because a part of me always expected him to do the right thing and come out and be like, "It actually didn't happen like that," but it never happened for years. I just had to get to a point where I was like, I guess we're not going to have closure. So it's a choice whether you deal with it or you sit here and you cry every day. Ooh, sorry, I'm getting emotional. That's when I realized I'm just going to have to forgive because the idea I had in my head of him ever coming back and saying, I'm sorry, or just explaining to me as to why it happened, I'll never get that. And it's something that that night I pushed it so far in the back of my head that I felt like I forgave him. I don't want to say that I don't forgive him and I won't forgive him because I know I will never heal and I will never move on. And every time I see him, I'll always panic. So I'll say it's a work in progress. Am I remembering it wrong? Did it really happen? All those questions, like I have them even every day. I remember like telling my friend that, oh my God, I have anxiety before I go to bed. I have anxiety before I know it's bedtime because I know I have to sit in silence and fight through the voices before I can fall asleep. And that has been the worst part of this whole experience. But I'm a believer in it gets better because I've been better before. So I don't see why it can't get better from here.
When it comes to other women, so I mean, this may have happened to other women. and they haven't come forward with him. This happens to women in the churches all the time in general. What would you say, aside from talking about it, what would you say they should do in terms of keeping their sanity and in terms of not, becoming a very, very bitter, hateful person and just let it completely consume them? As someone that's been there and has been back and has been there and been back.
I would say, I always say the saying, you can't control the world, but you can control your mind. And if the church doesn't help you, if the police can't help you, a therapist can help you. Just having a conversation with someone who doesn't know you, who doesn't know your story, who you know won't share your story, is one of the most comforting things ever, because you'll learn so much about yourself and how strong you are from just talking. So I would say seek help, go have a conversation. It's not always praying will make it feel better. It's not always let me read the Bible, because you can read the Bible from start to finish and you will not feel better. But just having a conversation with someone would definitely make you feel better. And speaking out does a lot more for for yourself and for people who are behind you, because you don't know who else was affected by that same person. You'll never know until you speak. So definitely speak out.
A lot of people won't speak out because it's almost seen as like a scandal, like you're trying to expose this person.
Main thing I always push is speak out, even if people don't believe you, even if people say you are lying, because speaking out isn't just you telling or exposing, it's you releasing yourself. It's you not keeping that inside of you. So it's not just speaking out to expose, it's speaking out to let it go. So definitely just speak out and find help. It's not something that we have to be putting on posters and hashtagging on Twitter, this person did this, because it does a lot more damage sometimes than it does help. Because if the person you're accusing has a big following and people don't want to believe that, that is going to damage you and that is going to hurt you mentally. So yeah, I think people need to kind of let go of this issue of we're doing this to expose rather than we're doing this to help.